Education, the board meeting of the Board of Education, April 21st, 2020 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being streamed live on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Welcome to our viewing audience. We're happy that we found a way to go match video with audio tonight. We're also glad that we have a way to incorporate real-time public testimony. This evening, we will just be addressing our business agenda and receiving a second briefing on the work underway in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much. At this time, the board will vote on the business agenda. Board members, are there any items you would like to pull for discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the business agenda?
No. Madam Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Is there an item you'd like to pull from the business agenda?
Well, but I just have a question, but if I could just ask it now, then we could just do it all together.
Okay, why don't we have a motion and put it on the table and then we'll have discussion?
So moved.
Director Bailey moves and
Second?
I think Director Brim Edwards seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Is there any board discussion? Julia?
So I just had a question on the Roosevelt Windows project, and I don't know if and it hurts or maybe Dan Young could answer.
I don't know if
Looks like Dan is on.
This is
Hi Dan. I thought Julie, I had a question about that as well, and I didn't see the staff response until just before our meeting, shortly before our meeting. Otherwise, I would have forwarded it to everyone. But Dan, that was really useful information. Can you just provide the general background, and Julia, see if you have additional questions?
Well, actually, I can just ask my question because I thought the memo was really clear. Thank you for providing that, Dan. So my only question is on something like this where we are doing an advance authorization. It looks like based on the materials that the low bidder was determined to be responsive. If in a situation like this, it turns out that if you have advanced authorization and we aren't able to reach an agreement with them on a contract, do you come back to the board, or is this a general approval?
Yeah, good question. I believe, yes, we would come back to the board if that was the scenario. That's pretty rare, of course, that case. But I think in this particular instance, yes, that's exactly what we would need to do is come back to them.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I appreciate the background information. Looks like the district's going to be able to get some work done in advance.
Yeah, this is great to see because I know those temperature issues were really a huge deal for our Roosevelt staff and students, and that this is coming from the Roosevelt project budget and we're able to still get that done is good news.
Yep, correct.
All right, the board will now vote on resolution 6095 through 610 6100 in the business agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? The business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting
Yes.
all right. Before we begin public comment, I would like to review our guidelines for public comment. The board thanks the community for taking the time to virtually attend our meeting and provide your comments to the board. We value public input as it informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen. Board members and the superintendent will not respond to comments or questions during public comment, but our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them. If you're watching the board meeting via the live stream while waiting, please make sure that you mute prior to your turn to speak. If you leave it on, it will create feedback and you will be muted by the meeting administrator, and then we'll come back to you. Please make sure when you begin your comments that you clearly state your name and spell your last name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak. You will hear a sound after 3 minutes, which means it's time to conclude your comments. We appreciate your input and thank you for your cooperation. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Yes, we have Anderson, Du Bois.
All right.
Anderson Dubois, I have unmuted your line. You're now open to speak.
Thank you. This is Anderson Du Bois, spelled Andberson, and Du Bois, DU, capital BOISE. I'm the Youth Rent Services Manager for REAP. I am a 5-year staff member of REAP and alumni student of REAP as well. I was involved with REAP when I was in high school at Lincoln High School. And now I have the pleasure of partnering up with the PPS district, working with Lisa Hawkins at Beach Elementary. Just a little bit about our organization. It's a nonprofit started in 2001. Some of you guys might be familiar with it already. We currently only serve Beach Elementary in the PPS district. Some of the various programs that we run and facilitate are our Reflections program, which is our alternative to in-school suspension, restorative justice, trauma-informed care program, wherein which students can proactively be referred to our staff that are full-time by the administration of the school that we partner with, and solve any conflict that might arise due to any disciplinary issues. We teach them communication skills, conflict resolution skills, and do restorative circles within the school to provide any supports that the school might need and that the students might need in order to build a stronger community of leaders. We're all about youth voice, and that's also why we have solutions as a program in many of our schools that we serve, which is an all-day support service where we check in with students, and then after-school class curriculum where we partner with some of the Sun schools that we run with. So specifically at Beach, we partner with SEI. At Beach, we have 2.5 FTE, 3 staff members that are there, 2 full-time that support the students, checking in and providing advocacy for the students. And what is great as a community partner, being there full-time, we're able to provide a special eye as we have unique relationships with students and with teachers. As we see everything that goes on, we can help bring in suggestions and ideas from the community and from the voice of the students to provide support for the school. And I'm sure that Lisa will be able to speak a little bit more on that. But being able to have some of these unique conversations and the scope of work that we do in terms of providing supports for discipline in our Reflections program, it allows some of the staff to be freed up, especially at Boise, to be able to focus in on the roles that they have. So for an example, I actually was just talking to the PE teacher. I got a video from him of testimony stating that he's able to focus less on discipline within his class and out in the hallways as he gets pulled out to sort of handle some of those things as our staff are able to come in, and him as well as other staff are able to focus on their roles more, which allows the school to bring even more structure, more supports for the teachers and their students. And we're able to come alongside in the tables and the behavioral meetings for conversation. And next, Lisa can speak a little bit more towards her experience with us.
Anderson, I think that noise that we're all unfamiliar with just indicated that your 3 minutes for testimony are up. But I want to thank you very
Yes,
much,
yes,
and
I was
we
turning-
appreciate the role that
Perfect.
REAP plays.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Ms. Bradshaw, do we have any further comment?
Yes, we have Lisa Hawkins.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Hawking. My last name is spelled Hawking. I'm appreciative of this opportunity to provide public comment about our partnership with REAP. A quick but deep thank you to Area Assistant Superintendent Keely Simpson. I'm extremely grateful for her vision and advocacy for REAP to begin working with us last spring, because the benefits to so many of our upper grade students, especially our students with more complex needs, and also many of our students of color, are great. The positive impacts from our experiences range from the individual child level, classroom level, individual families and families overall, individual staff, our whole staff, and also to our larger school community. While there are so many important stories, I'll share about one boy who represents all levels. He's gone from someone who, despite many best efforts, was demonstrating compliance at best and disruptive and unsafe behavior often, to someone who giggles, who is willing to distract himself from his own frustration by doing a relevant job until he can regulate himself, who now has a safe space for crafting, which he loves. He feels safe sharing his enjoyment of crafting with peers. And this is a child who was regularly shut down in anger and frustration just several months ago, whose family was defensive and avoiding support. Through trust and relationship building, collaboration with the classroom teacher and specialists that included a week-long full classroom culture reset that REAP staff and our beach counselor, school climate coach, and teachers orchestrated together, program elements such as Elevate, which is an in-school alternative to suspension, collaboration with parents, problem solving with other students. REAP and beach staff together are helping this child find his ability to advocate for himself, to build positive friendships, and to project a different story into our larger school community, to feel more successful and to be ready to learn and grow at school. And his parents are partners. While his teachers, including myself, continue to learn a lot, REAP also helps us grow as a larger staff. In addition to individual level meetings, we meet regularly as a REAP school leadership team to discuss what's working, what's not, and ways to bring more culturally responsive practices forward to our larger staff. A few words from our teacher of 31 fourth graders. REAP offers our students support that is both gentle and firm. Miss Ilsa helps my students work on social emotional skills that subtly help with academics, like copying a poem that talks about self-love. REAP's community support gives our students an opportunity to build a positive relationship with our school in a really graceful, intentional way. My students are more engaged and I have fewer issues with attendance. Especially given the way the school year we're in this year, we know that our students and staff would really benefit from REAP support as we begin next August. It would be incredible if a contract renewal were possible this spring. We'd be able to plan and strategize together for next year and start the school year, I think I can say with certainty, stronger than ever. So with that, thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Hawking. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have any other public comment?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you so much.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. And for those who are wondering, Mr. Reesner, we can see you on the screen, and I think the public can
Thanks for using
too.
WebEx.
And
Visit our
this,
website at www.webex.com.
oops. This is our first foray
Sorry
with
about that.
So, Mr.
I
Reesner,
meant to, yes, sorry about that. I meant to hit mute for you.
no problem. Just here to provide some support with the platform for our maiden voyage this evening. So thank you, and that explains to everyone your helpful smiling presence there. Okay, Maxine, our student representative, would you like to provide a brief report tonight?
Definitely wasn't aware that I was providing a report, but I can sure talk for a few minutes about just like what's going on.
I think even if you just want to share about your experience as a student in virtual learning land, we'd all be anxious to hear about it.
Yeah, sure. So as for DSC stuff, we're shifting our focus, obviously, because we can't do our in-person meetings or summit or any of that stuff. So we're shifting to virtual recruiting and focusing our efforts on just meeting with students virtually to support their, questions about COVID. We had a great meeting with Craig and some other people was that last week? I don't know. The days I don't know what they are anymore. So it's kind of hard. And that was really great. As for like being a student in virtual learning land, I think my experience is a little bit different because I'm a senior. So I did not have as many classes this year. And a lot of my classes were more in-person stuff like ceramics and weight training. So like I'm sad I don't get to do those things anymore. But my teachers have been really great in providing like workouts for us to do for weight training and being able to like still do research on ceramic e-pottery stuff, which is fun. And I'm still going to class, although it is at 9 a.m., which is kind of hard for me to wake up that early and like actually get out of bed. But I'm still doing it, and I'm still trying to be involved and doing all of my district work. Been still going to a lot of meetings and talking to people. I had a really great opportunity to be a part of the Postcards from the Pandemic series that OPB is doing with Elizabeth Miller. And that aired today, which was really cool. I hadn't been on the radio before, and now I have been. So that was cool. As for just like other student stuff, obviously I'm still sad that like all this is going on, and it's weird that it's been a month that we've been out of school. But I'm just still glad that FaceTime exists and that I'm able to still talk to my friends on the phone, and that everyone is staying connected. But I miss everyone a lot, and it's weird. So that concludes my report.
Thank you so much. And we'll send out a link we'll make sure everybody gets a link to that Postcards from the Pandemic on OPB, because you were really amazing, and it's a really beautiful little series and little piece that you were in. So you were great, Maxine.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, Superintendent Guerrero, welcome.
Actually, can I ask Maxine a question?
Of course.
Hi, Julia.
Hey, is there a new student representative for next year that's been selected?
That is still being worked out. We're still in the process of that stuff.
Okay.
But soon.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Superintendent Guerrero.
Good evening, directors, staff, and our viewing audience. I'm going to be brief in my report because really the main entree tonight is a second briefing to the whole board by the administration. So we're looking forward to letting you know where we're at now for our last conversation as a whole board. And I appreciate that directors have, many of you, set aside some time for some ongoing briefings as well. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say a few things before we jumped into that content. The first is, public school districts don't operate in a vacuum. We definitely want to share our appreciation for all of those frontline workers at this time. You see here some community pictures wanting to call out the commendable work, the heroes that are doctors, nurses, EMTs, firefighters, police officers, etc. We're going to do a virtual pots and pans at 7 p.m. But since we're here in this meeting, wanted to make sure and let them know that in this Portland ecosystem, the way they're serving our community is something that is very impactful, and we appreciate as we go about doing the work that, we're responsible for too. So thank you to all of our frontline workers for your dedication during this time. I also want to appreciate our board manager, Roseanne Powell, our technology department, our multimedia services. Thank you, Terry. All of us are having to make adjustments in our way of work. So thank you, board, for leading the way in experimenting with new technology platforms. Our attempt is to try to continually find ways to make the business of the district accessible to the public, and look forward to your feedback at the end of the meeting about how this platform is working for us. So you're going to hear this evening our cabinet members and leaders sort of cycle through a variety of topics and work strands that they have worked very diligently and purposefully to stay on top of. And I just want to call out up front that there's a few guiding principles with which we've been trying to observe in this process. One, of course, to make sure that we're providing those essential services to students and families, that we, in fact, maintain continuous learning opportunities for our students. We're going to hear a lot more about that tonight. And then, as importantly, and I appreciated Student Representative Latterall's comment, the importance of doing our best to encourage and maintain connections between students, their teachers, and other school personnel. While the campuses are closed, we don't want to lose that notion of school community. And if you've been following some of the social media, there's many examples of how our educators are working towards thoughtful ways of maintaining that sense of school community. So thank you to all those folks for that work. And then I want to mention something that may be a little bit disconnected or directly unrelated to this COVID pandemic. It's a reminder that there is still this other ongoing work occurring in the school district. And I'm referring to things like our school modernization efforts. So even as construction and the workers take their own precautions, we maintain steadfast our ambition to stay on track with those projects. And not unrelated, board members heard recently that, and thank you to our Deputy Superintendent Claire Hertz and her finance team and council, we had some bond sales recently, and as we carefully monitored those sales, we actually found a really critical time window that proved economically advantageous. And I think just another example of how the voters and our supportive public is continuing to visibly see the construction, but also us work diligently to be good public stewards of resources and, in fact, find opportunities to leverage additional funds. So we're pleased with that. We know that those dollars will continue to support capital improvements. I want to remind people it's not just about these fabulous high schools. It's about the health, safety, and school security upgrades across so many of our campuses. Much of that now due to some deferred maintenance over the years that we're able to pay attention to during this closure. And so that work continues. So I just wanted to sort of put a plug in there, a commercial, because we have some hardworking staff and construction companies who are doing work at our schools in the way that maybe isn't visible in some of the other work that we're going to talk about. So, and then finally, I'll just mention before we jump into our briefing that we're not operating in a vacuum here. We're continuing to stay in constant contact, not just with our own essential services staff or staff providing many of those supports. Our COVID task force continues to meet on a daily basis and often through the weekends. We are continuing to collaborate with our neighboring school districts here in Multnomah county, and we're staying in close contact with our peers around the state, as well as the Department of Education and member districts of the Council of Great City Schools. What's clear is that many of the themes that we're going to be talking about tonight are similar challenges and opportunities, some would say, that other large urban school districts are also facing. So it's helpful to know that we're not alone in this effort, and that everybody is trying to find a thoughtful path forward. So I'll pause there because I think we're going to focus most of tonight's agenda on providing the board with a second briefing.
Thank you. Who's up next?
Well, I am. That's the pause. And I'm just going to do an intro here because what directors are going to experience, similar to our last whole board meeting, is a cast of characters providing a high level of summary information and description. We're going to ask to get through the presentation. There's a lot of detail, and certainly we'll be interested in all of your questions. If you want some clarification, of course, don't hesitate to stop us, but we're also prepared to take your questions at the end as well. So just to review where we are, we've prepared a slide deck we shared with board members in advance. Our cabinet members have some other notes that they're going to want to cover. Just to lay some context for where we are, especially from our last meeting. If you recall, March was an interesting month. It started with March 8th, Governor Brown declared her emergency order that there was a public health threat by this novel infectious coronavirus. A few days later, on March 12th, Governor Brown ordered all schools to close, what we thought at the time, temporarily in an effort to stop the spread of coronavirus. And then on March 17th, Governor Brown issued an executive order, 20-08. It physically closed all public school campuses through April 28th. And it asked districts to think about how to continue providing a supplemental level of education. But as you know, things have continued to progress beyond the initial direction to consider operation of essential services, including nutrition services, for instance. The executive order also laid out some requirements that LEAs or school districts would need to observe in order to continue to receive their ongoing state funding. Things like making sure that our employees remain compensated. And then that brings us to some of the dates on this slide. That was what we knew then, and now we're coming back to the board, and there's a few other milestones that we've reached, which I think are important to review for the public. On April 8th, Governor Brown announced that our students wouldn't be returning to campus this academic school year. And with that came a bunch of guidance speaking to a move or an evolution beyond supplemental educational services, knowing that our campuses were now going to be closed, to shift to reimagine and retool to a distance learning for all model. And so our teaching and learning and many of our staff in collaboration with our labor partners got to work about how Portland Public Schools would implement this guidance of distance learning for all, which we've named PPS HD, and you're going to hear about that in more detail, and more importantly, how the launch has gone initially. On that same date, we also received guidance in an area that has a lot of our seniors understandably anxious, as well as our educators who want to make sure post-secondary plans can proceed undisrupted, and that's Graduation Pathways 2020. And I'm going to stop here for a second because I want staff to start to insert themselves into this conversation. Deputy Superintendent Dr. Cuellar and our regional sup for high schools, Joe LaFontaine, I'd like them to give you sort of the highlights of that Graduation Pathways 2020 guidance, because it's absolutely critical to understand that, because it shapes how we are now implementing supports for our 12th graders. So, Craig?
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, Board. It's great to see all of you. And just to, I wanted to just backtrack a little bit, because I thought having a conversation with Maxine was timely, because Maxine is experiencing what almost all of our students are experiencing during this time, especially our seniors. One of the things, before we actually get into the details of the Graduation Pathways 2020, which was released by the ODE several weeks ago, is specific to around our focus on our seniors, specific to the wraparound supports that we are that we have to make sure that we are providing them at all points in time. It's really, really important that even in the guidance that the ODE has stated, and also our own stance here in PPS, is making sure that we are mitigating all the negative consequences that have come from this time of lost learning, and how we are focusing our attention in supporting all of our students, especially our seniors. This is a very, very important year for our 12th graders. I had an opportunity to talk with a lot of our seniors last week, and I empathize with them because a culminating year that's supposed to be filled with recognition and celebration really has shifted significantly due to this pandemic. But knowing that we're going to continue to do our very best to make sure that we're supporting our seniors. And I think that is always going to be our focus first and foremost. But I will go ahead and turn it over to Mr. LaFontaine, our Regional Superintendent of High Schools, who's going to walk us through some of the graduation requirements and the modified requirements based off of the COVID-19 shift. And then Joe will also walk us through some of the work that he and his teams, as well as the OTL department and a lot of other departments, have been doing to make sure that we're making this experience as smoothly as possible for our seniors and staff. So Joe?
Learning our high, sorry. Yeah. When we first saw, can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as we first saw the guidance go to distance learning, we immediately began retooling the high schools for that type of approach. And one of the approaches we took was basically taking our staff and asking them to divide the student body amongst the staff and try to reduce the number of student contacts to the smallest possible denominator, so that we could actually reach as many students as possible. We did it in a couple of different ways at different sites, but basically just started right out of the gate trying to make contacts with as many students as we could and develop relationships and find out who we were able to reach and who we could not reach. And that work began actually the week of April 8th. And so we've been working very diligently on trying to build those contacts and reporting each week on what the contacts look like. So just so that you know, right now we are in contact with 94% of our seniors right now on a very regular basis, and 92% of our 9th through 11th grade students. We feel very good about that number, and that number is down considerably from last week, and we're going to continue to press on and build on those relationships. We still have some connectedness that we need to do, but that's something that we're working toward very diligently, is making sure that our students have contact with our teachers. The students want it, the teachers want it, and we're working very hard to make sure that that exists and we're sustaining it. To the specifics inside the graduation pathways, I know that you've seen the document, but let me just speak briefly to the differences between the guidance and what PPS has for diplomas. And so PPS actually has a higher bar of rigor than the Oregon diploma, and I'm sure you're well aware of that. And some of the ways in which that it does differ is in regards to the amount of PE credit that we take. Ours is very specific. This particular diploma says that you can blend PE and health for the credit. Similarly, it works that way for social studies. They say it can be any 3 credits. Ours are very specific credits that we want our students to have. And some of those changes, such as that, have made it such that there's more flexibility in the credits that students have earned that we have been retooling to address. So working with systems planning and performance, we have taken our mainframe that we use for tracking all student graduation, and Dr. Brown and his department have retooled it to the new Oregon standards so that we could sort and understand which students have made progress and which ones have not. And just to give you an idea about that process in our normal year usually takes us a couple of months actually to vet our seniors and identify all seniors who maybe there's somebody who failed to enter something in the system, and it just takes a long time to vet all those people. We're looking at trying to get it done in 3 weeks. So they have been working just insanely hard to try to understand which students are where. The graduation pathways to 2020 states clearly that we are to award second semester credit to students. I'm going to speak just about seniors because there's guidance for 9/11. To seniors who had passing performance work as of March 13th. We are not to grade any work that would have been delivered in the instruction after that date. Though we want to continue to engage students in that work, much like Maxine is doing. We have great relationships with our students and we want to keep them engaged, but we're not permitted to actually use that toward a grade. And the only grade that we're permitted to issue for the second semester is a pass or an incomplete. And that's because of the obvious reasons that the quality of what we can do and how it can change from that short window of time over the course of the semester is indeterminable about when students are engaged or not engaged in the work. As I said, we still have some students who we've been even unable to reach. So in fairness and in equity, we're trying to keep it at a level, and the state of Oregon's guidance that comes out in that pathway document states explicitly how we're to identify the work and move the work forward and engage the students. I can tell you that the teachers are speaking with students on a very regular basis, and I know I was talking to a parent of a freshman today who got 80 contacts from her school today. And so sometimes maybe a little bit more than they want. But I guess what I want you to also know that we are supposed to be able to report our graduating senior status by the end of April. And so we're now working on those letters to communicate that to families with the credit report for what their actual credit status is. So there will be some letters going out saying your student is shy a few credits. Right now, at this point, we know that we are we have 70% of our senior class right now that could graduate today by these standards. We also know that another third of the remainder is a half a credit away from graduating. So we're in a very good place for good graduation rates, and we are working every day to vet and track those students and provide them opportunities. I can go into greater detail about what those opportunities look like, but there's a lot in this presentation that you want to know about. I think one of the things that you would like to know about is that the ceremonies that we have for our students, we're still trying to plan some things for them. Our seniors, we want to celebrate our senior class, and so we're doing some things. We're trying to identify some things that they would find fun and still trying to keep the traditional graduation in place, maybe just a few more weeks down the road than originally planned. With that, I'll pass it off to my colleagues and give you an opportunity to look a little bit more deeply at grades 9 through 11.
Thank you, Joe. So no sooner had the Department of Education issued its very much anticipated graduation pathways data, the next subsequent predictable question from school districts was, what's your guidance for other high school grade levels, 9 through 11? So Sean, do you want to say a couple sentences here about in what ways the guidance for grades 9 and 11 is similar to what we had received to our seniors a week before.
Sure. So it's actually, good evening, board directors, Sean Bright, Chief of Schools. It's actually quite similar to 12th grade guidance in that it will be pass or incomplete. The difference is that students will continue to receive prioritized standard instruction for the remainder of the school year. So we've worked with PAT and we've sent messages out to staff members today. We also sent communication to family members today that by May 1st, our teachers that teach students in grades 9 through 11 will finalize their quarter 3 grades, and that will be either a pass or incomplete. And beyond that, we want them to deepen the work that they've done with students this year on those priority standards, and then continue. We're asking them to find the most essential skills that kids need to move on to the next grade level and be successful. Understanding that not every student has the same kind of access or the same quiet place in their house to learn. And, there are lots of variables that we can't control for as we could in a school building, but we do want teachers to prioritize those standards that are most important, and then understand that in the new year we'll be developing plans to meet students where they are, assess what their gaps in knowledge are, and catch them up moving on. But the grades situation is the same for 9 through 11 as it is for seniors, pass or incomplete.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. So as the board can see, this is a different way of conducting business or requirements of expectation for high school age students. So the State Board of Education actually had to convene to establish temporary rules, specifically where they touch upon Division 22 regulations. And so the State Board met on the 16th. It made those adjustments in a number of related areas, including what does it mean for students who were due a seal of biliteracy, for instance? What does this mean for accounting? What about free and appropriate education for students with disability? And those temporary rules were all passed by the State Board on the 15th, the 16th, that is. The following day, on the 17th, this past Friday, superintendents were able to receive a preview from the director of the Department of Education regarding the rest of the grade levels, K through 8. That hasn't been issued officially, and we don't expect it to change substantively from the draft that we saw, which will likely and essentially maintain sort of that continuity across all grades, where students won't be penalized for any work after the school closure. So it will call out those efforts for continuity of learning via the Distance Learning for All guidance, but is not intended to academically harm or penalize our students. So we're waiting for that guidance to be officially posted. But essentially, you'll see the experience looking somewhat similar K through 12. So why don't we go on to the next slide? And since the meat of it is this, in fact, this distance learning plan, board members got an initial sort of sense of how we were thinking about this, and had talked about how we were, what the elements of our home-based distance learning plan, recalling that distance learning doesn't mean only virtual or only technology-based, but rather encouraging learning to happen while students are off campus. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Cuellar and Dr. Valentino, who are going to talk about how these distance learning components look, how they've begun to launch, how they're starting to materialize in the experience that our students are having across the school district.
Thank you, Superintendent. Craig Cuellar, Deputy Superintendent. We're going to go ahead and go into an overview, hopefully being able to provide you some good information in terms of all of the different pieces that go into building our PPS HD platform. I do want to make sure that we preface everything that the launch of the PPS HD is directly aligned to the 4 guiding principles as outlined by the Oregon Department of Ed, which is a focusing on ensuring safety and wellness, cultivating connection and relationship, centering all of our decision-making and efforts, especially on our academic expectations around equity and efficacy, and then, of course, learning through a platform of innovation. And so the team has worked extremely hard on putting together a virtual learning platform that aims at making critical connection with students, but also keeping the academic and enrichment, moving forward for kids. The team has started working on this actually on the onset of the closure. And one of the things that the superintendent stated at the last board meeting was that we didn't necessarily have to wait on the guidance from ODE. The team around the clock in a lot of different task forces and work groups have actually been putting together this effort. On week one of this effort was truly aimed at reconnecting and re-engaging with our students. And we're using a platform that Don will talk about a little bit later called the Remind platform. That's really one of the main tools that this team has been using to engage and connect with students during this time. With that being said, I know there's a lot that goes into this, and I definitely don't want to steal the show from our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Valentino. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Luis, who will lead us into the body of this work.
Luis, you're on mute. Luis?
Dr. Valentino?
There you go.
Yes, hello?
There you go. You're on now.
I'm okay now? Oh, okay, apologies. This has been a process, as was shared with you previously and early this evening. This has been a phase-in process because as we launched this, there was a lot that we did not know yet or understood about how to take the learning online and do it remotely. And so for all of us, there was a lot of newness. And so part of that learning was not only what were the components that we were going to use to support teachers and students in the work, but also what were we going to need to do differently to ensure that they had both the tools they needed, but also the supports along the way. And so over the course of the past 5 weeks in that learning, there's been an evolution in how we've approached the work, such that we've landed on home-based distance learning in a very comprehensive and sophisticated way. And it's required the intense work of not only the deputy superintendent, the chiefs, but the staffs. The teams have been incredible, as has been noted already. But part of that has been, how do we ensure that teachers have the necessary understanding to begin to work in this kind of environment? And so the platforms that we used really allowed for that to happen, and providing them with the time and the space to learn how to use the tools that would allow them to connect with students and actually begin to teach remotely. And so that has evolved to say that we're moving from the initial support and guidance and the troubleshooting to now thinking more midterm and long-term around what is the learning that teachers need to continue to engage in, and what is the as well as site administrators and essentially to continue to move this work forward in both the academic side of the house, but also in the social emotional learning side of the house. Brenda Martin can speak more to this because there is really the clarity here that when we return, we're not going to land in the same place we were before we actually left. And so what will that mean for us? And so we are now thinking about a professional development plan that really looks at how our teachers going to ensure that each child, whether they're English language learners, students with special needs, et cetera, that their needs are being met along the way. We started by setting a foundation, right? That we were going to focus on language arts, math, and we're beginning to add additional subjects as we go, as the comfort level expands in teachers. But more importantly, how are we ensuring that whatever we're providing is actually being accessed by every student? And that is where we have moved to now, to start thinking more discreetly about how are we helping teachers to give students who, even before we went online needed additional supports. How are we ensuring that those supports are in place? And so that has been our work. At the same time, we're beginning to build out with the mindset that we could become a more digital district. And following the superintendent's vision on what it would mean to do that, what is the learning that we now need to put in place so that we can begin to leverage what we learned about the uses of technology today, that we could then begin to use it in the future as part of a blended learning environment, as part of a more personalized experience for students that actually meets more discrete needs for each one of our students. And so following the guidance from OD, I think we've been a little bit more, I don't want to say aggressive, but a little bit more comprehensive in how we've been looking at the student experience, whether they have a device or whether they have a broadband or not, that if that's not the case, what are we going to provide in the nutrition hubs so that it parallels what students are learning online, that a parent can go to one of the nutrition hubs and pick up a packet of material that will help him or her to continue learning so that they don't fall too far behind. And so there are a lot of components that have been informing the whole bit of the home-based distance learning model, that in the academic side of the house, but also in the social emotional side of the house. So I want to turn it over to Brenda Martinick to speak to that aspect of it, because I think it's a really important piece that will help us as we address how we all return to better access the needs of the students.
Thank you, Luis. Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So as we started our initial rollout with our distance learning plan, we knew that what we needed to do was first talk to staff about the trauma they're currently experiencing and talk to them about their own emotional wellness, and then how to not only take care of themselves, but then also help take care of the students that they were going to be virtually working with. And so the first thing we did is we provided professional development with Elena Aguilar, and that's kind of what set the stage. It was actually a mandatory training for all of our administrators and our teachers. And then we have 8 subsequent sessions that are optional, so that if staff need that additional support, or if they want to learn more about that, then they will. But this was an amazing opportunity for us to be able to take this extremely unfortunate circumstance and turn it into something that teachers could benefit from in regards to their own wellness, and then also help to educate our children and help them to learn pro-social skills and also be able to take care of themselves and build that resilience. Additionally, we also developed 20-minute SEL lessons for staff. It's 20 minutes a week. It's now on Atlas, and it is for our K-8 students. And then we also created wellness resources for staff that is on our teacher portal, and they have access to all of those resources. I'm going to turn it back over to Craig, because I'll talk more about special ed and counselors and mental health down towards the presentation a little bit farther. I think it's like slide 15 or something. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brenda. I really appreciate it. And your team has been working so hard to make sure that that we are absolutely on the front lines providing those wraparound social emotional supports for children. So thank you to you and your team, Ms. Martinick. I also wanted to make sure that we allowed the opportunity for Mr. Wolf, Don Wolf, our Chief Technology Officer, to talk really quickly with an overview of some of the tools that we are using for our PPSHD platform. Mr. Wolf.
Good evening, Board of Directors. Thank you, Dr. Cuellar. Don Wolf, Chief Technology Officer. From the outset, and I will try and be brief here, but I'm excited about the work that has taken place, is in shifting an entire district from an in-person instructional delivery where you can call people up and get access to tools to shifting it all online. There's a very clear need of how we're going to centralize that. How are we going to make that easy and available for teachers and for students and their families to be able to find? So along with folks in the Office of Teaching and Learning, the Learning Technologies teams have taken two existing student portal and teacher portal, which were a collection of 6 or 7 links on each one of them, and really built them out into be a resource portal for where staff and student can go to find the key and the primary tools that they're going to use. During this closure, we have settled on Seesaw as a K2 for our younger students for their learning management system, but we haven't licensed, or because of the COVID closure, the licensure extends all the way up to grades K8, and we're finding some usage there as well. In that particular learning management system, just this last week alone, there have been 100,000 posts from students and from teachers of sharing their work, what they're doing, and how they're engaging in that work. So that is the primary platform for the lower grades. Grades 3-12, we're using Google Classroom. The usage of that has exploded. There's been a large push in there for staff and teachers. We've got 60,000 assignments that have been shared and responded to from staff and student throughout that as well. I don't know if we want to talk about one of the primary tools that we've implemented during this time in response to moving from a place where all of our teachers had access to a phone to reach out to their families and to their students, and not having that when they go home, not wanting to necessarily expose their home cell phone number or their private numbers. We implemented a program called Remind, which allows teachers to engage in mass with a large classroom, with an entire school as a principal from a district level, and to be able to have those direct one-on-one communications. We were able to stand that up pretty quickly, get teachers trained. We're refining some of the rough spots, but at this point last week, there were over 438,000 messages communicated to our families and to our students directly through the use of that platform. So keeping our folks engaged and knowing that we're here with them, that we're part of the solution for them, and making sure that they know somebody is going to reach out to them and they have that communication back to the schools has been a big part of where we're trying to go with this. Dr. Cuellar, is that?
That is perfect, Don. Thank you so much for the overview.
I'm sorry. Can I just ask a clarifying question? It's Julia from Edwards. I just wanted to make sure I had those numbers. Was the 100,000 posts was at the elementary on Seesaw? Is that
was on Seesaw?
And then the 60,000 was on what platform?
That was in Google Classroom.
Okay. And the 430, which was on what? 438,000 was on what platform?
That's Remind.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to, and Chair, you can decide if you'd like to take an intermission before we go into the second half of the presentation. You've heard sort of an overview of the ODE guidance, elements of the distance learning plan, and some of the technology efforts to provide access to devices and connectivity. And then want to talk a little bit about, in this closure, we know communication is critical. We go back a slide here. Could I ask our communications department lead, David Roy, could you speak a little bit about what have been, I think, pretty broad efforts at all levels of the organization as we've made this shift? Communication of expectations has been an ongoing effort. David?
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, everyone. I know we will talk in a few moments about sort of overall communications efforts since the beginning of the closure, but regarding PPS-HD and moving at the speed that the district had to move, it's been really important to make sure that we are regularly and robustly informing families about kind of the what's and how's of PPS HD. So I'll mention a few of those efforts in support of my colleagues who have just spoken about this. The centralized resource for families is on our website, so pps.net/HD. We started that immediately as we rolled this program out. It is a centralized resource. We planned, branded, rolled it out on April 2nd. One of the first things on that part of the website is a big downloadable Q&A document for families. And we have learning tools on there for all of the things Don was just talking about: Remind, Google Meet, Google Classroom, Seesaw, Canvas. We have quick guides that our language access team helped us with, working with our IT folks to have kind of one-sheeters for all of the different platforms that students and families might use. And what has been nice about that is that's one of the many things that we've also printed and had available at our meal sites or meal hubs. We have tech support info letting families and students know how to access that Otis team, with the superintendent's video introducing the program and the platform, and information about access to district computers in your home. Talk already about sort of from an expectation standpoint. Right now, besides that Q&A, we have a few things. We're shifting more to that mode as we get more guidance, and we are a couple of weeks into this. If you, I just ago got an infographic and one pager that we're going to send out tomorrow about hours per week expectations by activity type and grade level for families, and hopefully provide a little more clarity there, information about what teacher-led activity is against student-led activity, and we think some helpful advice in a really easy to read format. We messaged about high school senior guidance on April 10th, grades 9 through 11 guidance today. We expect from ODE K through 8 guidance this week. We've also updated students and families about assessments, including MAP, AP, IB. And this week, we just got more information on resources for students regarding that. We are working this week to push more parent and family-facing messaging on how-tos. We are supporting Dr. Valentino as he regularly updates and sends messages to teachers. And then the same thing for Dr. Bird with principals. And so, a lot going on. Virtually everything, if not everything that I've just mentioned that is family-facing has been translated into all of our supported languages. So these student and family-facing messages and updates are going out in 6 languages. And then the last thing I'll mention from a multimedia services standpoint, Terry, who pressed the button to make this meeting start officially tonight, has been working with Dr. Davis and Maestra Amparo on some of the videos that they're making in OTL. And we are looking now, and hopefully we can do something in the very near future, of using Comcast television station 28, where we stream these meetings, to get content on there. And then also take that and put it on our YouTube channel to where you don't have to have cable to be able to act. Working with our instructional partners on that, so more to come.
Thank you, David. Chair Constam, would you like to pause here before we go into the second half of the presentation?
I think it might be helpful, thank you, to see if anybody has questions about what we've learned so far. I know I have one question. Maybe I'll kick it off. Back to Joe LaFontaine's and Dr. Cuellar's presentation. So are we able to provide any intensive supports for our seniors who are not considered on track to graduate so that they can actually accelerate their credit attainment, or at least, at the bare minimum, keep up with the pace that they were on before?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of different things in place. Because of the decision to cut grades off as of March 13th, We have evening scholars as well as virtual scholars that we're retooling to support seniors in credit recovery that way. We also are working with Danny Ledesma's partners in the community because they have many contacts as well to actually find some of the students that we're having trouble making contacts with. So there's a lot of different things at play right now in trying to find students and provide them what supports they need. Today, Dr. Valentino and I were also discussing another pilot project for credit recovery projects that are project-based projects, okay, that students could do and to recover a half a credit. There's some really interesting guidance that came out from ODE in regards to proficiency-based approaches that we don't employ so much in our grading processes as well as we probably could. And so we're going to try and optimize some of those to reach our seniors so they can demonstrate proficiency so we can award them the credit that they should get for being able to do the work that we expect them to do, to be able to do.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's a great question, Chair Constam. We also have on deck Dr. Russ Brown and Danny Ledesma, who are going to talk a little further around our shared goal of making sure we're identifying and case managing every single senior to get across, even if it's virtual, a graduation stage. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but Joe gave you the initial highlight there, but we'll come
And I also have a question too, Superintendent, before we move forward.
I think you can go ahead.
I just wasn't sure if I didn't mean to talk over you. So thank you. I had that same question about how we're working with seniors who aren't on track, and glad to hear that we're reaching out and being proactive about that. But I have another question about how we're tracking online attendance and what the expectations are for the teachers. Are teachers tracking online attendance for the younger kids? How are we maintaining contact with students and parents in this time? And does that burden fall on the parents, or are there other staff such as family engagement staff or social workers in the building that are doing that contact?
Dr. Bird or Dr. Cuellar, do you want to review the expectation that we've received in the guidance around attendance or recording of contact with students?
Thank you.
Sure. So teachers are not taking attendance like they would in a regular classroom. However, with the Remind app, they are able to track the contacts that they're making with students. So the Remind app has an archive feature. So if you send a text message, it archives. If you send an email, it archives it. So we are able to keep track of how many kids we've been able to get a hold of, how many families we've been able to get a hold of. And then we can have, our principals have done an excellent job and teachers have done an excellent job of tracking down families that they've not been able to get a hold of. There is a document that was produced that was shared with teachers to indicate the expectations, and it's different for grade levels, but basically there's an expectation for contact every week with your students. In the secondary level, it can be asynchronous or asynchronous contact. So a teacher could go online and have a class and teach the class, or they could record something and put it online for students to do, and then they have office hours where the students can just come and check in and get additional help for other things. The same is true for elementary school. There's a weekly contact expectation, and it's sort of ramping up over time. So it started out with as a 20 minutes contact to really check in with kids to make sure they're okay, and then now it's ramping up as the weeks go on. But the reason that we implemented the Remind app was so that we could track the contact that we're making with families and make sure that it's not only for academic contact, but also to make sure they have what they need, and if they need assistance or other social services, that we can put them in contact. Our counselors have been working to do that as well. So we're trying to provide as much wraparound service as we can for families in this time.
That's fantastic. I guess I was wondering if we had a way not only to just track that, but to notice trends. For instance, if you have 28 kids in your class and there are 4 kids that regularly don't show up, or do we have a way to contact those families or those kids? But by the way, thank you everybody for pivoting so quickly to do this and work in such a different way. But yeah, I was concerned about if we're able to notice trends and who's not showing up. Not that we're taking a strict attendance for punitive purposes, but so we're able to track who we're not reaching.
So yes, we do, and our principals and teachers are maintaining those that information, and have, you know, they are working with us if there are people that they can't get a hold of. You know, they're working with a counseling office and other offices in the district to try to help track people down and make sure that they're aware. In some cases, it's been a matter of getting the technology to students who haven't had it yet. So we've distributed, I think, over 12,000 devices over the last several weeks. So in some cases, it's just a matter of getting people online. But even for those children who are not able to be present in the class, they have had contact. The first goal was to make contact with students, and that's an ongoing goal, is to make contact, make sure children are okay, and make sure that their families have what they need. So teachers have that information. It has not funneled up to central level yet. At this point, I have not seen the statistics of each school, but that is something we can gather because teachers and principals are collecting that data.
Thank you, Dr. Bird. And, you know, we're sort of responsible for tracking and monitoring our contacts. So thank you for all of our educators doing that. You're going to hear a little later in the presentation how we're also engaging our community partners to make sure we're not letting any of our students fall through the cracks during this crisis, because these disparities, they only get amplified during a time like now. So stay tuned to hear just a little bit more about that.
So we have any questions before we move on?
I have a question. And this is, it's for the high school about the high school seniors, but also, I think it applies to, sophomores and juniors, any students who are in AP, advanced placement, IB or international baccalaureate or dual credit classes. So given that is a really important way for a lot of our students to earn college credit, and, you know, assuming they take the exams and get a passing grade that a college accepts as equivalent to a college credit, for many students, that's a way to substantially pay for almost a year of college, or provide them with a year of community college credit. And so my question is, I know that sounds like AP is still going to have the test in which students could earn credit. It sounds like that may be the case for IB as well. My question, my sense is that maybe you'd have fewer students taking those tests than normally, and therefore missing out on sort of this free college credit. Is there, are we looking at how many students are taking it, and whether there's an opportunity for a summer, and I don't know if either AP or IB would allow for this, but for summer testing, so that students would head into, especially high school seniors heading to college, could get that credit?
Well, I'll answer part of it, and then I'll flip it to Joe. So we have a couple of scenarios. We have students that are enrolled in dual credit courses. They are still continuing their courses, and their college grade, they'll get a letter grade for that course. If they finish, that validates their high school credit. So they can make a B in the college class, get the credit, and be transcripted on our college transcript rather, and they get a P passing on the high school transcript. The AP students are allowed to take the exam. But the testing window has not changed for the exam. There are AP teachers I know, because I've heard from many of them, are reviewing for students for their AP exam. I don't know, I don't have information on how many students have elected not to take the exam. I'll throw it to Joe for that part, and I don't believe that AP is considering offering an alternate testing window right now. But Joe, do you know any more about that?
Yeah, Dr. Bird, I think that's pretty much it. Those programs, we would have to hear from those programs to move those timelines back. Those aren't really things that we have much flexibility in determining ourselves. I do not know any answer, Director Brim-Edwards, in regards to students who may have moved out or opted not to participate. That's a really good question. That's one of our primary goals that we have in the high school, and I'd actually like to know the answer to that question myself. So I'll look into that and respond to you offline.
Yeah, I'm curious because, so just having had students in, two students who were in IB, is that getting that content for the, 2 months before you have your exams was really critical. And so I'm just, given this is not just obviously in Portland, but all across the country, whether there's some other way that students, if they don't get the don't get the content or don't have the confidence that they're going to be ready for the test, whether there's some other mechanism that we could provide them, just because this is their sort of last chance to get that free credit.
The one thing I will say is the IB program has a very strict scope and sequence to it that is actually international. It's not something that we determine. And so those assessments are aligned to that scope and sequence. So if we're not the only school district that's going to be in the same situation. So they need to be responsive to what the student needs are as well. And so I would imagine if there's anything coming, it'll be broadcast quite widely. But I will look into what the numbers are. That's a really compelling question. I'm concerned to see what those numbers might be myself. I have not heard any concern from any principal, and I'm in daily contact with them, about students who are walking away from those more challenging coursework.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Do any other board members have any questions?
Yeah, this is Rita. I had a couple of questions. The first is, are we going to be hearing more about special education?
Yes, we actually have, for the second half of this presentation, we're going to focus on a few things. We're going to sort of, at the midpoint, talk about some of the budget contexts that I think everyone around the state is finding themselves in. And then we're going to come back to some other operational updates like nutrition services. We want to talk about some of our vulnerable populations like special education services and continuity during this time, as well as some community engagement that's playing a role during this time as well. So that's what we have on deck for staff to speak to next.
Okay, I'll hold off my questions then. Thanks.
All right, let's proceed.
All right, let's do that. Directors, as you know, we're in the middle of a health crisis, but there's another crisis on the horizon, and that's what we anticipate to be an economic impact, not a favorable one, in the state of Oregon that trickles its way down into K-12. And as the largest school district in the state, we have to be prudent in beginning to understand the context, knowing that we don't have clarity, that clarity doesn't exist yet necessarily at the state level. And there's a lot of variables here, how federal stimulus dollars will trickle down to us, what decisions the legislature will make, what the May revise includes, et cetera. So we thought it'd be important to spend some time by having our Deputy Superintendent for Business and Ops, Claire Hertz, walk us through sort of the scenario that we're finding ourselves in, because it's going to lay an important context for how we proceed. Claire?
Good evening, Board of Directors, Superintendent Guerrero. I would like to start with, this is a slide from the State Economist's Office blog, and they are calling this recovery a square root recovery from COVID-19. You can see how we initially dropped into a severe recession overnight. And so there's a sudden halt in the economy, right? And as we all stayed home. And so one of the things that we know is the economy has gone down as the health of the populace has gone down. And as we see improvement in our health situation, you can see that we see an initial bounce back with the opening of some of the restrictions beginning to lift, and then it starts to flatten out a little bit as things open up, and then people are starting to get back to work. And then there's multiple scenarios. It could be a pretty moderate development of growth, where you see a quicker bounce back. And then if it's a slower growth, you could see that it would take longer over a longer period of time. So the state economist is calling this a square root recovery, as you think of the math symbol. But it is definitely tied, the speed of the growth depends on our overall health. So as good health returns, our economy will return.
Can I ask just a clarifying question on this thing?
Yes.
Is there any time frame associated with this, or is this just a kind of visual help?
It's to give you a sense that we fell down quickly. We'll have as it opens up, we'll have an immediate bounce back as restaurants and hotels and all of the things start to open up. And then it's unknown how long it will take us to recover. And they're saying the health will determine that time period. Okay. Next slide. So as we look at budget forecasting, there are many unknowns at this point, but this is what we know. This is the things that we are looking for as how we work to develop our budget for 2021. So we know that we're going to have a state revenue shortfall. We're hearing that from the economists. We will receive a forecast on May 20th. So we're looking forward to hearing that. And then we're also looking for what our status will be of the student investment account from the Student Success Act funding. We're also expecting to receive federal stimulus dollars. I heard this morning that on Thursday, the feds will release the allocation by state level, and then it has to go to our state, and they have 30 days to give us our application and guidelines on how to apply to receive our funding. I understand we'd receive 90% of that funding and 10% would stay at the state level. We also need to know how much our state has in terms of reserves. I'll share that with you. And then, but how much of that they're going to use towards education in first year, multiple years. There'll be some questions on how much they'll use. We also are looking at how much we need to make in general fund reductions at Portland Public. And then we also have Portland Public Schools reserves and questions on how much of those we'll use and over what time period. So if you'd go on to the next slide, please. So if you look at the state revenue shortfall, you'll see that the state general fund and lottery fund is $23.67 billion for the biennium. And the K-12 budget is $9 billion, or 38% of that budget. So whenever we lose $1 billion in state revenue out of that $23.67 billion, whenever we lose $1 billion in state revenue, that equates to losing $30 million in Portland Public Schools, so in our state school fund revenue. We also have in question our SIA funding that it was at $39 million, and we're being told to budget at $10 million increments because we're not sure what level we will actually receive that funding. So we could receive 0, 10, 20, 30, 39 million. Okay. And the governor has also told us to hold off on hiring positions in the SIA funding. So we've not only done a hiring freeze for this year, 1920, we're also holding off on posting at this point for 2021. So if you could go on to the next slide, Pete, please.
Can I ask a quick question? This is Rita.
Sure.
Is there any discussion of postponing or suspending the imposition of the tax for the Student Success Act?
So the governor we hear supportive of SIA and what the legislative process will determine what priorities will come forward with funding. So there's 3 types of funding in question: state school fund, SIA, and then also Measure 98 dollars. So those are all 3 things that we're looking for a special session of our legislature once they have the May economic forecast, how they will be allocating each one of those resources to school districts.
So maybe just a comment on that, Director Moore, is there are some who are advocating that the implementation be delayed, but I think there is a pretty strong support to move ahead, and the fact that there hasn't been a special session to date means the tax is actually being implemented. I think the one probably bigger threat to the funding from the commercial activities tax is that, as you can imagine, because it's based on gross receipts, there's been a pretty dramatic drop in gross receipts in the first quarter, unless you're a grocery store, a liquor store, or one of the other essential businesses that's still allowed. So that the forecasted number, it was $1 billion plus a year, probably will be substantially lower, but the reality is the tax, because action hasn't been taken to delay it, is in fact moving into implementation.
Okay, thank you.
So on slide 8, federal stimulus, we have the CARES Act, and we have a distribution coming based on Title I funding formula that we expect about $7 million in this first round of funding. And it's to be distributed to K-12 between now and September 30th, 2021 is when we need to spend it. So over the next year, my understanding is there will be a lot of flexibility on how that money can be spent.
Claire, question is that additional money more than we would have expected through the CARES Act?
This is the money that we're expecting from the CARES Act. It's an estimate right now of $7 million. But what I can tell you is that we don't have the U.S. Department of Education allocation yet. So this is all based on estimations that we're receiving at the national level, and then applying that to our state title funding, and then our 90% of what we would have in that Title I allocation for our district. So again, this is a very preliminary estimate number, but it is additional funding, $7 million above what we would have had from federal funding prior to the CARES Act.
Great, thank you.
But just to be clear, or to clarify, Claire, that Title I funding is the entirety of the federal disbursement, and it's not just intended for our Title I schools. It's just that every district's entire allotment is determined based on the percentage of Title I students. Is that right?
So they're using the Title I formula and process to allocate to states, and for states to allocate to districts. However, we're not restricted on spending it in a Title I manner. We're able to, there's a lot of flexibility. For instance, in distance learning, when we need additional resources to implement distance learning, or when we're paying a premium for custodial staff. There's things that we're allowed to spend on that are not part of our normal Title I funding. It's not restricted to that grant restrictions. It's just being allocated through that framework from the feds, if that helps to clarify.
Thank you.
We can go on. Let's go on to slide 9, please.
Can I just make one editorial comment? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but in comparison to the stimulus package that was issued by the feds in response to the 2008 crash, compared to this CARES funding, the amount of money that's being allocated to education is pretty much a pittance in comparison.
Rita, the Council of Schools statistic is it's 0.5%. And I think what they were saying about the recession support for public education 2008, 2009 was closer to like 10 or 12% of the whole LEAP package.
There is going to be a fourth package in early May that potentially could be another opportunity. So the passage of or the work this week on sort of the third package is going to be subsequently like either early or mid-May going to be put together. So another opportunity for I think local districts to engage with the delegations and the House and the Senate.
I think that's an important point, Rita, just to put it in perspective. The American Recovery Act, the level thus far hitting public ed doesn't measure up. We're thankful that the council, and I think we've shared with directors, if not we will, is being pretty aggressive about making sure subsequent federal stimulus has a more robust, dedicated stimulus dollars coming our way. So we'll stay on top of that.
And Superintendent, you've just signed on to a letter with other superintendents from large districts around the country advocating strongly for greater support in the fourth bill. And there's certainly a role for our whole community in that advocacy too.
And this is Andrew. I guess I just want to jump in on this. I agree with everything everyone said. There is, it's part of the CARES Act, money going to the state overall and going to local governments, portions of it. And City of Portland received $114 million yesterday from the feds, and which is an incredibly rapid turnaround time given their application was just last week. I don't think that money is necessarily designated, but I don't, and so this is maybe both a question and a comment. I don't think it's prohibited from the state and cities and local governments from spending that money on education as part of the COVID response. So I think there's work we can do there as well in terms of getting in that queue and talking to both the City of Portland and then also the state about some of that money, because $1.6 billion is going to the state, of which this $114 million is a piece of that. Multnomah County will also get a chunk, as well as Washington County.
We encourage our elected board of directors to remain engaged in advocating resources for our district.
Hammer down.
As I continue to go through the various factors that will impact our budget building for this next year, this one of the pieces that we want to consider is how much the state will use of its reserves as we are looking to shore up from the revenue shortfall with the economic decline. So looking at this chart, this comes again from the State Economist's blog, and what we have here is their Education Stability Fund and Rainy Day Fund. If you look off to the right, you'll see in a column of January 2020 that they have in the Education Stability Fund $678 million and the Rainy Day Fund $675 million. And then they also had a funding balance, an ending fund balance at the state level of $1.15 billion. So they had about 11.7% in reserves for their general fund. They were projecting that to continue to grow through the end of 2021, but as you can imagine, the end of the biennium numbers are no longer valid numbers. So if you look at the chart to the left, you can see over a period of time, over biennia, what has been in reserves. So we've right now in 17-19 and 19-21, we have historically larger reserves than we've had in the past, especially when you compare to the 2009-11 biennium and the 2007-9 biennium. You can see when that economic time hit, there were very small reserves. So the question is, how much of these reserves will the state choose to use as they balance the budget, the legislature? So again, the Education Stability Fund is meant for education, and the Rainy Day Fund is meant for the overall state budget. So that is
maybe before you move from that slide, I think because there's, a corollary of PPS's moving from 2001 when they had no reserves. It's just really worth pointing out the sort of financial management and stewardship of both the state and the district of putting money in reserves, because the 2001-3 recession, when I was on the board before, when there was no reserves, it made cuts were made that had a lot of long-term pain, and I think really credit to the district and the state to have built reserves, because we're in a much better position than we were, whether it was a decade ago.
Thank you. So, and if you look at with this red line, this just shows the percentage of fund balance over time. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Now turning to the PPS general fund for this year, you can see that 33% of our budget is in teaching or in licensed salaries, and we have 8% of our budget in classified salaries. And in the green, we have 4% in non-rep staff. In the purple, we have another 4% in administrators. And then the turquoise is another other salaries, things like substitutes and coaches. So all of that together, plus the orange color, 27%, is all of our payroll costs, Social Security, health care benefits, all of our payroll taxes and benefits for staff. And so overall, the salaries and benefits equate to 80% of our budget. Okay, so that leaves 20% for everything else. If you go on to the next slide, slide 11, you'll see, again, this is a representation of the 1920 adopted budget, and then you can see the FTE by type of employee. You can see we have licensed staff of 3,124, and we have classified of 1,400, and this is all in general fund. And so you can see a couple of years history and actuals, and then also last year's budget as well as this year's budget. So overall, we have about 5,100 staff members, full FTE in our general fund budget. So that just gives you a sense of, as we're looking at how we're going to balance our budget, where we're spending our dollars. So most of our budget, by the time you pay for all of our staff, there's by the time you pay for insurance coverage and utilities and fuel for the buses, there's not a lot left. So when you are making reductions, it's clear it needs to come from staff. Okay, moving on to the next slide, slide 12. Just like the state has reserves, the Portland Public Schools has reserves. And as of the end of last year, we had about 40 million, or over 6%, in our general fund. And we also have a PERS rate stabilization fund that has 18 million, or about 3% of our general fund. So both of those, well, the one is definitely available to us as we try to work to balance out over the next few years. And then while we wouldn't qualify necessarily, as PERS rates are expected to go down, even though we anticipate the future liability to go up, we had the same thing happen in 2008-9, and it just because of the way they value the fund, the PERS fund, through actuarial valuation, it just takes time for them to change rates and to give all the public entities notices of rates changing per biennium. It just it seems difficult to be receiving lower rates right now because of the change in laws, when we know in the next biennium we're going to have to increase even more. So just a question in my mind. I don't know if there's anything to be done about that, but it's something that I watched happen last time, and it's sure hard to watch it happen again. So lots of moving parts still in terms of how we're going to develop our budget and balance, but we are again working on tiers of reductions. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, 13. And we have, because of COVID, we've been tracking our expenditures. We've had additional purchases. We've spent about $100,000 on curriculum. I know there'll be more expenditures for that. We have about $80,000 we've done for cleaning supplies, face covers, and cell phones. The biggest bulk of that is all the disinfecting materials needed for all of our schools. We've also invested in Chromebooks and software and Wi-Fi hotspots and the messaging system for our staff. So all of these things are additional expenses to general fund. We're still working on forecasting what that the impact of COVID will have. We have some savings, but we also have additional costs. And so we are working right now to project those figures for you in a future financial update. But the forecast, that all the pieces that I've shared with you and how we're going to develop our budget, we will be bringing a budget calendar forward to you at the May 5th meeting that will move our proposed budget to the end of the month after the May economic forecast. And we bring forward a $9.0 billion budget, proposed budget, which is the funding level for the biennium before COVID. And we will include the SIA funding at $39 million and the Measure 98 funding at full funding. And then we'll have, are identifying tiers of reductions because we won't really know what our budget needs to be until after the legislative special session. I can remember in the mid-2000s, there was a year that we didn't get approval from the legislature until the third week in July. I can imagine it will be difficult for our state level leaders to balance the budget. So while we are receiving an economic forecast on May 20th, so we have at least some ideas of numbers to consider, knowing what kind of funding will come through and at what level, it's quite possible that we will need to not only propose, but approve and adopt a budget before we truly know the funding level from the state. If that's the case, we will go forward and with every 2 weeks, we'll have to move from a proposed to an approved, and then we'll have the hearing with the TSCC, Tax Supervision and Conservation Commission. All those things are required by law that we finish that budget adoption and appropriate funds and impose taxes by June 30th. So we will meet that deadline, even if it's not clear of our financial path at that point. But what we will do is, once the path is clear, most likely coming back in August to update the board and amend the budget based on what the final solution was. Now, we will be working with the CBRC, our Community Budget Review Committee, we met with their leadership today, and they are aware of this pending, knowing that we may not have a full budget process before they have to submit their report. We most likely will not know the funding level, but that we are focusing on our system shifts that we brought forward in February, and really using that tool. While we were using it to add resources, now we're using it also to make sure what resources we keep in place as we're looking to trim our budget. So we will be bringing more to you on that May 26th meeting of that work and our strategic plan focus. It will mean that it won't be a 3-year strategic plan, but a more extended time period based on the slower start due to lack of resources in the first year. So as we this year, we are continuing to do cost saving measures. We've done a hiring freeze and the purchasing freeze. The hiring freeze we have done for 1920, but also holding off on 2021 until we have more information about staffing levels. And then also the staffing, in order to be ready to open school in August, in whatever form we're holding school next year, we will need at some point to make a decision on how we're going to staff schools. And even if the legislature is not done, we need a good over a month, probably 6 weeks, to staff schools in order to have going through reduction in force process or whatever staffing process we need to complete. So just knowing there's still a lot of unknowns, but we are beginning to line out all the timelines of when we need to make decisions and meeting all of the legal requirements that we have, and then also just being ready for our students to return to school in the fall.
Claire?
So with that, yes?
Can I ask just a question about the Student Success Act? And I know that when it was created, they divided it into these different funds, and the SIA account was really the ones that was going to go directly to schools. And we spent a lot of time last year thinking through how that money could be spent to benefit our students. And I'm curious if there is a less resources coming in from the commercial activity tax because of the recession and the decrease in business activity, whether there might be a shifting, or there's been any, whether you know if there's been any conversations about shifting the money between some of those funds, so that if there is, say, a shortfall in the amount of resources that would be going directly to school districts, that there would be a sort of a rebalancing, so that individual school districts will be facing pretty large, probably budget challenges, that more will be flowing through versus being held back for the other programs.
So Student Success Act actually had money in it to balance the state school fund. It had money going towards high cost disability. It had money going towards our nutrition services program. There were, so they're definitely, they overlap with each other to begin with. And there was money needed for fully funding Measure 98. So when you look at the funds, state school fund has the least restrictions on a school district. The Measure 98 is something that's already been implemented across in 1920 to full funding. And then you move to SIA, and it has a whole series of processes and is limited to certain areas of spending. I am hearing some advocacy at the state level, not at formally, but there are some districts across the state that are advocating for more funding for the state school fund that provides the most flexibility rather than to the SIA funding. So just know that that conversation is being held, and that we are for PPS, we're really aligning to our district goals that have been adopted by our board and our strategic our system shifts in our strategic plan. Those are what are guiding our priorities, and those actually fit in all three of those pots of funds. So we'll happily accept any funding in any form, because we have a lot of excellent processes and a lot of excellent initiatives in our district, in improvement processes, in supporting our students and their families in the community. And we will gladly spend all types of funding in supporting especially our racial equity and social justice components as a core of our work. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on, and that's kind of the end of the fiscal presentation. I just want to pause in case there are any questions before we move on to operational updates.
I just want to say that, you know, that square root curve, the pace of recovery completely depends on the federal government, and whether, are they going to let a lot of small businesses fall apart, or are they going to support them? Are they going to see broad negative impacts from layoffs from public schools and local governments and state government, or are they going to step in and support us?
Appreciate that perspective, Director Bailey. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to operational updates then. So the next slide. Okay, so I can say that we are operating differently than we used to every day. As we are looking at our feeding our kids, making sure they have connectivity. We have a new way of going to work each day. For every staff member who's working on site, we have created a health and safety protocol. School nutrition service workers have been recognized on the cover of Time magazine as frontline staff. Staff wear gloves and masks for everyone's protections, their own and others. Our Emergency Operations Center has been open daily and finally took the weekend off this past weekend. That's just started. And believe me, we all needed it. There has been a need for ongoing logistics, operational supports, and communications daily. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Operations Officer Dan Young, who'd like to give us an update on our custodial and maintenance staff.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, Superintendent and Directors. This is Dan Young, COO. And I'm just going to give a very brief update, and please let me know if you have any questions. As Claire noted, all operations departments have developed COVID safety plans and are making progress on critical work. Our maintenance and custodial teams continue to support the child care and food distribution sites, as well as responding to high priority work orders in our buildings. Our transportation team is busy preparing for distribution of materials via our fleet vehicles, as well as updating transportation plans and bus routing at this time. As noted earlier by the superintendent, FAM project management and OSM teams are continuing work on dozens of projects, and they have established project-specific site safety plans for all of our on-site workers. And lastly, our planning and real estate departments have pretty seamlessly moved all virtual and continue efforts such as lease agreements, IGA negotiations, capital planning, and much more. And with that brief update, I will turn it back over to Claire Hertz.
Thank you, Dan.
And just a little more on our nutrition services. In the past 19 days, since March 17th, our team has served over 200,000 meals at 15 school sites, in addition to direct deliveries to 13 low-income housing locations and mobile home parks, and DoorDash deliveries to individual residences. Our meals have been served Monday through Friday, and on Fridays we give them enough meals for Saturday and Sunday to take with them. The meals are free to all PPS students and all children in our community ages 1 to 18 years old. This is all being accomplished by a team of 61 SEIU staff, 10 DCU staff, drivers and warehouse teamsters, and 18 central office staff, managers, and supply team members. The team has also been processing and receiving notifications of increases in direct certification for meal benefits through SNAPS, reaching 690 students just in April. And when you compare it, we only had last year only 22 students in April. So a very significant shift in our families' needs this month.
Wow.
Additionally, the department, pardon me?
Claire, I just wanted to note, aside from the fact that we should just take a little pause there and bang our own pots and pans and hoot and holler out the window about everything that we're doing in terms of food support for our families, because it's really incredible. But one other item is that I think we've had pretty strong coordination with our SUN programs to also do food distribution directly to our families. So not just the meals that are coming from our nutrition services departments, but using our distribution networks to get groceries to our families from the SUN program.
Through the community, yes. We submitted grants to Gen Youth and just received notice that we were awarded 10 grants of $2,000 each for our food hubs to support purchase of new equipment and supplies that will allow us to serve fresh fruits and vegetables like grapes and strawberries and jicama sticks and such in our to-go lunches. So the funds will also support all the purchases of boxes and bags for weekend meals and deliveries to the apartment complexes, etc. So we are, I think if we were going to bang our pots and pans, we should be banging them for our drivers. We have bus drivers that are coming back to work to deliver hotspots and curriculum materials. We have security staff who are helping with guiding traffic through and meal service and just supporting our cooks. We have custodial and maintenance workers that just come in and check our buildings and make sure that everything's in good repair and continue to clean as they're being used. Really, we truly have an IT staff that has been working night and day to get devices in the hands of kids. When you look at all of our support staff that have been working for weeks to help keeping everything running, even when school was closed, they were all in the background getting things ready or getting things out to kids, and then supporting our teachers and principals in getting ready to actually reopen in a new environment of school, of a virtual school. So at this point, that ends the operational support report, operational update. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chief of Student Support Services, Brenda Martinick.
Thank you, Claire. This is Brenda Martinick, Chief of Student Support Services. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the social emotional supports, give you a little bit more detail in regards to our counselors and our mental health supports. I talked earlier about the social emotional learning and the supports that we've been providing so far. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about special ed, and then I'll turn the time over to Luis Valentino, our Chief of Teaching and Learning, and he'll be able to talk about the last bullet with our emergent bilingual migrant and Indian ed supports and services. So first, I wanted to talk about what we're doing to help support students. We have been providing a framework for our counselors who are working diligently to make sure that students are engaged, that we're finding students, and that we are making sure that they have the supports that they need, that they're set up for digital learning, and that they're connected to their teachers. We've also set up 504 guidance for distance learning. That has been in collaboration with ODE, and in fact, we have another webinar tomorrow. So we'll get any further clarifications or guidance in how to implement our 504 plans. We also have set up tele-support guidelines for groups for our LGBTQIA community. So there are some supports in place for those students. In regards to mental health, we have already provided guidance on a one-on-one and small group wellness supports for students. We have readjusted our suicide screening, our threats screening, and our sexual incident response into a virtual learning environment so that we can support staff and students and families. We've also provided our mental health providers that we've been contracting with. They have continued to provide teletherapy, excuse me, and about 70% of their clients are choosing to stay involved. There's about 20% who are less engaged, but they're staying involved just less frequently. And then 10% of their population we've not been able to engage with. And so we're still working on different ways to try and engage with that 10% of our population. All of our mental health therapists are working in collaboration with our schools, our school teams, our social workers, because we have a few in the district, and our counselors. We're also in the final stages of a youth resource app, and so that will provide youth in public schools an app that's easy to use and is updated with supports, information and resources in response to COVID, and also where they can either talk or text through Lines for Life. And then we are still planning for our Mental Health Month, which is in May. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. In regards to special ed, it's been challenging to provide services to students in a digital environment. It provides us with an additional challenge when it is a student with special needs. And sometimes the distance learning and the virtual environment isn't as conducive for students who need things that are a little more hands-on, a little more visual, or more auditory. So we are finding our way, and we are going to continue to do that. The things that we're currently doing right now is we're using what's called a digital learning decision tree. So, which means that our case managers for students with special needs are first looking to see if they can implement the IEP as it is. If it is, then they're meeting with families, they're talking with their students, and they're just moving forward. If they believe that they can't, then they are working in collaboration with the family to develop what's called a digital learning plan, or a DLP. This is all dependent on what the IEP team decides in collaboration with the family. We continue to engage with our students and our families, and we're tracking the services that we provide, and we're also using a contact log. All of our SLPs, our OTs, and our PTs, so SLPs are speech and language pathologists, OTs, which are occupational therapists, and PTs, which are physical therapists, they're all adopting a telepractice. We last week we provided a training from Dr. Megan McGill from PSU on telepractice. All of our SLPs attended that training, and we have continued to contract with Dr. McGill to provide ongoing supports, to provide office hours for our SLPs, OTs, and PTs, and then be able to problem solve in the moment with our itinerant staff. And we've actually received a lot of positive feedback in regards to that. We have also delivered over 300 assistive technology devices out to students, and that is in partnership with our LIFT program that Jonathan Garcia has been supporting. And then I just wanted to do a shout out to Jeremy Lowe. He is our program administrator in special ed, and he personally took this on as a project and has worked with our assistive technology team and was able to get 300 devices into the hands of students who aren't necessarily able to communicate any other way except through their assistive technology device. Our AT, or our assistive technology staff, continue to provide consultation and support to families. Our Learning Center teachers are working with our Gen Ed teachers. We're also offering office hours for our special ed program administrators and TOSAs. We're having a ton of virtual meetings and teaming and trying to strategize different ways in which we can provide digital learning and accommodations and modifications for students. The concern right now that we have is transition planning for our incoming kinders. That is over 400 students that we are trying to figure out how to plan for them to come in for kindergarten. So that is kind of like our big, the big rock that we have to move right now. Next steps, we are meeting with PAT either the end of this week or next week. The meeting's getting scheduled so that we can talk about the ongoing work in collaboration with PAT and how we can set reasonable expectations and work in collaboration with our PAT partners in making sure that we get services to some of our most marginalized students and students who aren't really able to use the technology and devices in the ways in which many of us are able to use them. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Valentino.
Actually, Ms. Martinick, could you hang on 1 second? This is Director Lowry. I had a question, and my cat jumped on my keyboard at one point there during your presentation, so I missed some things. So you may have already said this, but I have heard that some of our speech therapists are not able to provide services right now because of restrictions around telehealth, and that they have to get another certification to be able to do their work remotely. Did you already address that? And I'm sorry if you did. And what are the plans to kind of help those students who are not getting speech therapy and other things in this moment?
Right. So we have been working with our SLP group. We have worked with them through ODE. They also presented to ASHA, and ASHA gave our SLPs similar guidance. And so at this point in time, there are no barriers to our SLPs in order to provide the telepractice services. So we are expecting that they are providing service to our students.
Thank you. I will follow up with that constituent.
Thanks. Anything else before I turn it over to Luis?
So this is, Julian, I'm not sure, Brenda, if this is your slide, but it's about a student support issue that I guess if we wait till the budget, it's probably too late. And so I'm wondering, and this is a question for the superintendent or someone else, we had plans for summer supports for Rosa Parks and the schools that were getting the CSI designated schools where we had students needing additional supports. And I'm wondering how we're thinking about that, because I know often the planning has to be done now in order for there to be anything to be offered. And again, so, sorry, Brenda, this isn't fit quite in here, but I'm not sure quite where it fits. And I'm wondering how we're thinking about that, just because it wouldn't necessarily be part of the normal next year's budget process.
Right. That isn't entirely in my area, but it is something that the EOC has brought up as something that we do have to start planning around, is extended school year, so ESY services for students with special needs, any compensatory, and then summer schooling. So all of that summer schooling that happens, we do need to put together a plan for that. And so I'm only one piece of that puzzle. And I know Dr. Bird has a big role in that as well. And then, of course, the superintendent and ELT. So I don't know that we have answers. I think we have about as many questions right now. So, but it is an issue that we need to tackle, and we need to tackle it soon.
So maybe a question for the superintendent: who would be on point for that the summer programming, whether it's continued distance learning or something else? I think it's unlikely that there would be actually school and school buildings, but are we thinking about that might be an option?
So it's the right question, Director Brim Edwards, and many of us are talking about it all the time. We're especially sensitive to the fact that many of our kids who were already challenged with staying at grade level expectation are falling further behind. I was going to kind of conclude tonight's presentation talking about not knowing whether we can switch up our delivery service to bring in kids, if not in June, maybe as a head start in August before school starts, to offer some services, or for a range of other summer program we had on deck. We wanted to continue to expand our arts academy. We had plans for STEM summer camps in many of our clusters. We know that some schools are on a slightly different, or one of them on a slightly different calendar. We have a lot of the same questions, and we know that they take some planning. And so we don't have any firm answers tonight yet on that, but we're definitely thinking about it. So I would just say stay tuned for now.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you're thinking about it. It makes me kind of heartsick to think about all the work that's gone into the plans and how needed it is.
Agreed. So Dr. Valentino, do you want to say something quickly about some of our vulnerable student populations?
Yes. So in addition to the classroom supports that are both direct by the ELD teacher and supplemental supports being provided for our emerging bilinguals and there are also support via our ESL TOSAs available. For our migrant education and Indian education student supports, one of the things that we're beginning to focus on is making connections with the families. And so our work with our bilingual aides, as well as those out of migrant ed and Indian ed, are beginning to make contact with the parents to work closely with them. Supplemental supports, instructional supports are also being put together as supplies and kits that are going to be distributed alongside the other instructional materials at our instructional hubs to make sure that both the academic as well as social emotional supports are made available for both our bilingual students, our migrant ed students, and our Indian education students. And so that is work in progress that we are focusing on right now. I'd like to hand it over to our Chief of Staff, Stephanie Soden, at this point.
Thank you, Luis. Good evening, board directors. I just wanted to introduce the next topic. You heard briefly from our senior director of communications, an overview of some of the efforts his team has been working on. I just want you to know they've been working tirelessly since before this began, for the closure. And some of the things we've worked on is there's a comprehensive website and online tools. We branded our district, our distance learning effort. We've had focused and regular ongoing communications toward a variety of audiences. Our community engagement team, they've been connecting with students during this time where some of them are more isolated than ever. They're reaching communities that are not necessarily online and other hard to reach communities. Our strategic partnership team has been raising money, securing important donations, identifying new ways to partner with businesses. And all of these efforts have been closely aligned with our racial equity and social justice focus. So I'll turn it over to our Chief Engagement Officer, Jonathan Garcia, our Senior Advisor on Racial Equity, Danny Ledesma, and David Roy to share more information.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Garcia, Chief Engagement Officer. We're so grateful to so many of our partners, including DoorDash and Lyft, who have gone above and beyond to make sure our families who need meals delivered or transportation to essential locations get it. Some of these partners are big names like Comcast, Lyft, Amazon Web Services or AWS, and many others are names you have probably never heard of. Some have been major gifts. Some have been generous gifts from community members wanting to lend a hand. All in all, our community is really inspiring me and really inspiring all of us to rally together for our families. In fact, I'd like to take this point of privilege to read a quick message from a PPS parent I received recently. I get these type of messages quite often, and I hope, like me, you appreciate the ways our business and philanthropic partners are showing up and making a difference in our community. So let me read this really quick. Quote, "Thank you for all you're doing for the students and families. The recent fund that you provided to PPS families with Lyft really impacted my family and helped us tremendously. I was able to use it to help get my mother to pick up my daughter and bring my daughter home with her, as I needed to go to the hospital and be treated for COVID-19, as right now they're only allowing patients in the ER. They wouldn't allow my daughter to be here with me, so thank you for establishing this and getting the funds to support this kind of outreach. It really helped us." So again, on behalf of PPS, I just want to thank our business and our broader community for leaning in to support our PPS families and students during this time. So I'm happy to also report that our community has contributed well over $110,000 to the Fund for PPS to help get $100 gift cards for groceries and other essential household supplies for families. As of this morning, we have received close to 200 requests for assistance in the form of these grocery gift cards. In keeping with real-time need on the ground, we're working with our school administrators, our school counselors, our social workers, our attendance coaches, our community specialists, our community agents to help identify students and families in need. So if you know of any family who might be in need of this type of support, I ask that you communicate or have that family communicate directly with their school principal, their counselor, their social worker, their community agent, or their attendance coach who will help them get their family's name in the pipeline. We are going to begin distributing these funds next week, and we're working directly with our school-based staff to make this process easy and safe for all of our families. What I can tell you is this, our school-based staff truly know the issues our families are facing. Of the 200 requests that have come in to date, over 80% of families have had a parent or a guardian either laid off or their work hours have been reduced due to the coronavirus pandemic. And over 98% of the families requesting assistance already qualify for free and reduced lunch. So as you can expect, we're prioritizing our families with the most need and families facing multiple barriers to during this crisis. And so finally, for those in our listening audience who would like to donate to our Coronavirus Relief Fund, you can do so by visiting our website, fundforpps.org. Again, you'll be able to make a donation there on behalf of our students and their families during this time. So again, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Danny Ledesma.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'll give you just like a quick overview of some of the work that we're doing in racial equity and social justice with community partners who are either culturally specific organizations or multiracial organizations. Currently, PPS contracts with several culturally specific and multiracial organizations in 4 main strategy areas. The first is in culturally specific family engagement. These efforts are really aimed at connecting parents and families to the school system, working at sort of building parents' knowledge and understanding of the school system, school priorities, and content of what their students are learning to improve their students' success. And we partner with organizations like IRCO, NEA Family Center, Latino Network, SEI, and Black Parent Initiative at several schools throughout the district. And we have been doing this for quite some time. Another strategy that we work on is wraparound services. And those wraparound services are really meant to provide a deep level of case management and support, not only for students' academic success, but also to ensure that their social emotional learning is being supported, and that parent and family needs are being taken care of in a really holistic way, done through with supportive partners. And currently we partner with Open School Step Up, SEI, and Latino Network in the Escalera program. Our third strategy is mentoring and leadership development, and we partner with quite a few organizations who provide positive role modeling, positive intervention behavior, and a lot of really care and concern for our students of color. We partner with organizations like I Am Academy, Latino Network, Coalition of Black Men, Nothing But Quality, and Michael Grice, REAP, who you heard from earlier today, and Horizons Counseling, who works on the Youth Empowerment Program. Our fourth strategy is Extended Day, and we work with the Urban League and Chess for Success. They provide extended learning and enrichment activities for students to supplement a lot of the work that's done in the after-school programs through the SUN program. These 4 strategies, we've been working on these with our partners for quite some time. And as a result of the coronavirus and our response, we're in the process of amending our contracts with our partners to ensure that we're really tracking that they're continuing to provide a high level of service to our students and their families, but doing it remotely. So I've been coordinating with all of our different contractors. We asked them to submit a revised scope of work, proposed even changes to their reporting or the way that they are looking at, changed outcomes. And our partners, in the way that they work with us all the time, have really stepped up to the challenge. We've had a lot of really good interactions and examples of our partners really digging deep to continue the connection, although virtually, with families. We have one provider who's organized a series of online resources for families, not just for the school that he currently serves, but for the African American community in North and Northeast Portland. And in the next, I think it's the next couple days, is when the second sort of like virtual community will be happening, where folks are really looking at what are online resources, helping to demystify some of those resources. We also have some partners who've been working on retooling with their budget. So where they once had funding for field trips or transportation, they're now trying to make sure that they're providing direct services to parents in need, helping with things like food or transportation, similar to a lot of the work that we're fundraising through for the fund. And then Joe LaFontaine mentioned earlier about an example of our wraparound services providers who work primarily with high school students. And last week, we were really excited to see the level of coordination. All of our providers that provide wraparound service have a caseload of students. We track who those students are. And so we were able to provide all of the caseload information about each of these providers by school to Russ's department, so that when we're looking at that sort of like high school credit attainment analysis, that there is also a really clear field about which students were already connected to an advocate, either through Latino Network or SEI or Step Up. So they can be part of that team that really wraps around students to make sure that they're on track for graduation. And so we're really excited about that. And so, I think one of the challenges that our providers are facing, like everyone, they're looking at the budget outlook and thinking about sort of like what that will mean for their ability for their organizations to be able to continue to provide services. And as Jonathan mentioned, the philanthropic community has been really supportive, especially to our partners, in wanting to make sure that they're continuing to get funding. And so we're starting to think about planning for next year. And so right now, we've been, as a result of some of the work that we did in the past year, we continue to look at our strategies and developed a very clear investment strategy document, and have been working on that with our partners, and have, for the first time in quite some time, putting these set of contracts out to bid through a formal RFP process. And that RFP process was opened on April 1st and will close soon. And our partners will sort of be given the opportunity to think about how to really align not only with this, with our district's priorities and the upcoming realignment around serving our priority schools, but also in alignment with these strategies that we've worked really hard to outline that have been proven to have a lot of success for our students of color. So really excited about that. We'll keep you updated. I sent you all this sort of one pager that gives you the sort of current day what is, and I'll provide some more information with you as we find out more about these. So I'll stop there and turn it over to David Roy, who's our Senior Director of Communications.
Thank you, Danny, and hello again, everyone. So we talked about communication support for PPS HD, and just wanted to give a brief update on just overall communications efforts since the start of all this in mid-March. You all know we immediately started a dedicated page on the website, PPS.net coronavirus. We update that literally every day. That's sort of our essential resource web page for families and students. There's information about meals, mental health and safety, healthcare access, childcare information, and a lot of other resources, including some of the ones Danny was just talking about. We have messages to families, teachers, other key audiences. I think we have sent through School Messenger, through email, social, text, or email robocalls and text combined, about 300 messages in the last 6 weeks. So it has been busy, but there's been a lot of things have changed and evolved so quickly that keeping everyone informed and up to date and included has been really important for us. We have done a lot to support the great work that is happening by all of my colleagues who are speaking tonight, including some of the work Chief Garcia just mentioned. And starting this week, we'll be sending robocalls and texts daily to families who will be receiving home delivery of curricular materials. And those will be translated. And speaking of that, our language access team has just been remarkable. We're well over 100 translation projects for the last month. That's messages to families, that's educational materials and guides and curricular. We have translated math, science, arts, PE activities, and social learning curricula in all of our supported languages. We also have, I think a lot of people don't know this, but we have telephonic interpreters available at our meal sites. We work with an organization called Lionbridge, and that's on-demand telephonic translation interpretation services and goes well beyond our supported languages and supports over 100 languages. So when you think about the diversity of our families in our district and how that diversity is reflected in our meal sites, we think that's a really nice thing for us to have there. Families can contact our language access team to ask just about anything, and they will get an answer from them, whether that's something tech related or anything else. We're providing video interpretation for IEPs using Google applications, and for Jonathan's work on Comcast, translating the robocalls that are going to those families. Chief Soden and I and our CHRO, Sharon Reese. Sharon and I have worked together in the past on employee engagement. And before all of this started, we had been talking about some sort of district-wide employee engagement. We, in fact, had started some of that work. What we are still looking at what we can do to sort of lift and buoy our colleagues and build some of that engagement. And one of the things that we've done in the immediate term is, even though school days look a lot different now, with the return of school days, we have resumed the One, which, as you all know, is a daily snapshot of our district. And so over the last few weeks, we've been spotlighting some of our best and brightest, and our folks in nutrition services, our custodians, our warehouse staff, our teachers, building administrators, students who are really, really stepping up and going above and beyond, despite the challenges that are in front of us right now. So we get a lot of feedback from the One. And so we feel like that was a nice thing to sort of return a bit of normalcy back to our school days. And then finally, as far as media goes, of course, you have likely all seen media coverage of PPS over the last few weeks. Most of the outlets have been actually very helpful in amplifying our messages, especially with regard to computers, meals. They've just been really great, both in their reporting and on their social media, at helping us get the word out. I would also like to give thanks to the mayor's office and the county chair's office, who have done that as well on a regular basis. We have been shooting a video and getting B-roll for television outlets in order to give them something to use in their stories without having to go to schools and threaten, what we're working really hard on social distancing and other safety protocols at the meal sites. And so we're working with them. They're, like I said, have been a big help to us for the most part, and will continue to do that. We do hold back every once in a while. We do remind outlets that, we're going to answer to our families and our students and our employees first. So that may mean that you get something a day or two later, but we're going to tell our own folks first. But things have gone fairly well with that, and they've been understanding. So that's kind of an update from a couple of when we last talked a couple of weeks ago about what is going on with communications.
Thank you, David, Danny, and Jonathan, for your ongoing efforts. Directors, we're rounding the last corner here to bring it to a close. As you might imagine, and this continues to be a theme that we're sensitive to, we'll continue to bring up and attend to that. Surely this is having an impact in different ways with our students, and you'll probably hear us substantiate that a little bit more in the future, but wanted to give Dr. Russell Brown a moment to talk a little bit about what we might anticipate this school closure may have on student learning. Russ, there?
Yep, I'm here. Just took a second to unmute the mic. This is about the fourth platform now that we're operating in. So in terms of anticipating impacts on student learning, our partners at NWA have done some research around that, and not surprisingly, we would expect that there's going to be some loss in learning that accompanies this. That appears, at least when they looked at the data, and they based that on looking at the trends of what students typically might lose across the summer, sometimes known as summer melt, and then extending that for the extended period of time that students have been away from full-time instruction, time on task. Those losses are anticipated to be greater in the lower grades and greater in terms of mathematics. That being said, and without going into lots and lots of detail on this, this is an unprecedented event, and one that will require us to be thoughtful about looking at our continuous improvement efforts and effectively establishing a new baseline as we move forward and think about learning.
Thank you. So obviously it's tough to do systems performance when there's a disruption to our typical assessment cycles, our cycles of continuous improvement, and all other measures that I know that our board has pivoted is wanting to give importance. So stay tuned for more on that. And then I just wanted to come close to concluding here by hearing from our intergovernmental relations lead, Courtney Westling. There were some questions from board members around what's going on in the way of advocacy and how might we get involved. Courtney, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you all see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, Courtney, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. I haven't used WebEx, so thanks for giving me the thumbs up. Yeah, so hi, everybody. From my bedroom bunker. There's a lot going on federally, as was mentioned earlier, with the CARES Act and the potential, CARES 2.0 coming down the pike at some point in the next few weeks. A lot of advocacy coming around from the Council for Great City Schools and elsewhere about the need to support local government and school districts in this time, and a lot of comparison to the investments back during the 2008-2009 recession. So there was a letter that was alluded to earlier that that the superintendent has signed on to along with a lot of other urban school district leaders. That'll be going out later this week to the Hill. They were waiting to distribute it until after the small business relief package passed today. So that's on the way. I've also shared that letter with our congressional staff to make sure that they know it's coming. It's a really good letter, and it has a lot of specifics about what this is this is bleak, and they need to know what it looks like for districts at every level, because we're all in the same boat. So that's going to continue. I'm in regular touch with the congressional staff locally here to share information about kind of our needs. They want to know what's happening, what are we doing. A lot of it is been pretty consistent for the last 5 weeks, but it's really helpful for them to understand just the big pivot that districts like ours are having to make right now. And so a lot of just getting creative, and people are working really hard. So kudos to everybody for everything you're doing. At the state level, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. The Emergency Board, which is a group of legislators, a committee that will meet tomorrow for the first time virtually, that there's nothing related to education that is being discussed in that committee, but it does pave the way to have some conversations about other needs that are, of course, related to our families and students. related to housing, small business relief, a whole host of other items that I've shared with you yesterday in an email, and I'll follow up with specifics as they roll out. So that'll happen tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then after that, it's kind of a dance to the special session, which is, I think, a foregone conclusion, but no date has been set. It seems that, and I'm sure others know this as well, but it seems that that we're waiting on the revenue forecast. That's the big thing everybody's waiting on right now, is to see what are we really looking at? What are we going to have to work with next year? So as the information comes out, I'll be sharing it and just continuing to connect with my other district partners and the other associations that we work with at the state and local level to make sure that we're aligned and we're all, we're in the room, we're on the calls, the virtual room, I should say. So it does feel like we're connected and that the right people are hearing from us. But anything else you think that we should be doing, please let me know.
Thanks, Courtney.
So I'll conclude our second briefing to the board tonight. Thank you for your patience. We always try to balance directors' desire to hear how we're managing through this crisis. So you might have heard more detail than maybe you wanted insight into, but we also know it's of benefit to our public when they hear what's going on behind the scenes that may not always be visible. But please know that staff is really doing their best to meet needs as they come up. Already directors brought up a lot of questions this evening that sort of fall into the next steps category. Many of these are sort of unknowns at this point, but not necessarily uncharted, sort of on our parking lot of ongoing questions. For instance, we'll get the official K-8 guidance and we'll make sure our educators are aware of the Department of Ed's expectations for the continuity of learning at those grade levels. Also, you heard about the expected budget implications this may have on our school system, and we'll continue to sort of stay in contact with getting the best possible information to the board as well. And we've done the similar in a similar way, are keeping our labor partner leaders also in the loop and are having ongoing conversations with them in a very transparent fashion in the way that you're hearing tonight about what we understand to be our fiscal context. And, it's not a difficult stretch to wonder what the implications might be for our staffing, which is very sobering to us because we were in a very different place just a few weeks ago in our hiring timeline. So this is our reality. Questions around how do we support our students during the summer months? Of course, a lot of this will depend on a phased reopening approach as the governor shares her plan and what's permitted on campus. So we'll need to continue to be creative about how we continue to do what we can to engage students who really are going to need that additional learning time. Hopefully, we'll be able to do something mid to late summer on a limited basis in certain clusters. And very much on our mind, and I mentioned this last time, we definitely want to make sure to recognize our graduating seniors. So we've been doing a lot of brainstorming, and we'll probably be reaching out to many of our student leaders next. Maxine will want your input on what does that look like? If we can't have a traditional in-person graduation at the end of May or the first week in June, what might it look like? We're hoping that there's some slim possibility to postpone ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, maybe later into the summer. But if that's not possible, what are some other ways that we can think about that? So are we talking about virtual ceremonies? Are there other ways that we want to make sure to acknowledge our graduates for their time in PPS? So that's very much on our minds. You heard some of our leaders talk about what does a reentry plan actually start to look like? It's a conversation we're engaging our role-alike peers in other school districts. This situation has caused us to move faster than maybe we would have in incorporating blended learning approaches. And so how do we sort of leverage the fact that, and this is a historical, kind of awesome thing as a byproduct, we will, for all intents and purposes, be a one-to-one student-to-device ratio district. I'm not so sure we would have gotten there this fast. It took this crisis to get there, but now that we have devices in our kids' hands, what does that look like at certain grade levels to just maintain that issued device to our students so that our teachers and students can continue to leverage digital content and the learning platform even after we reopen brick and mortar campuses? So those are questions that we're also exploring. And then, of course, sort of the big task that we would be engaged in during the spring right now is our budget development informed by strategic planning. And so, again, this morning, our cabinet team was engaged in a conversation around how do we stay true to our vision, to the system shifts that we prioritized. We're not going to pick different ones, but how do we be realistic or be prepared to stretch out the sequence and the ambition of what gets implemented in this coming school year? So as the picture becomes clear, hopefully there's a continued prioritization on K-12 in Oregon. We know that many of our most vulnerable students are really going to rely on a lot of those wraparound supports that the SIA called for. We're hoping that we can maintain a level of those as soon as there's some notion that that's going to be a green light. We'll circle back with those social workers and additional counselors and others that we knew were going to be part of our game plan. So, and then the other business of the district continues in earnest. That includes leadership appointments. We invite the public and directors. We've shared the announcements with you. There are some school leadership transitions, and today we announced another new principal at Robert Gray. So congratulations there. Stay tuned. We're gonna continue to engage the community, even if it's virtually, to be a part of that interview process. So stay tuned for more leadership appointments there. So, and then next slide there, Roseanne. I'll just end with thank you. So many people in this organization and out in the community deserve a high five and gratitude from us. Thank you, Jonathan, for modeling it there. We thought that was an appropriate picture. Thank you, everyone, for stepping up for our students. We do recognize that there's also a level of patience that we're asking from our parents and our students as we try to be thoughtful and figure things out or not get ahead of ourselves before we receive guidance. Our principals have been great about noting many of the questions that we need to come up with resolutions for. So thank you, directors, and we'll end it with the last slide there. Just a couple snapshots, Roseanne. You see at the top there, that's a staff meeting for Benson High School that Curtis shared with us. And then down below, you see snapshots of our pictures engaged, our students engaged in distance learning in the home that have been shared with us. So everybody, we may not have them in front of us physically, but we've got a whole community engaged in teaching and learning in the business of the district. So
isn't that our student superintendent there doing his virtual learning?
That is the infamous Rudy from Lent School. So he very much is staying engaged in learning. That's a picture posted by his mother on social media. So we appreciate that he's not skipping a beat. And I know that many of our students and educators aren't either. So that concludes our second briefing to the board, a little bit comprehensive. Hopefully a third briefing will be a little briefer of a brief and answer some of the questions that are emerging for us right now. So, Chair.
Thank you so much. Really phenomenal teamwork, everyone. And we really appreciate the deep dive into what each work stream looks like right now in these unfathomable times. So we will adjourn, and the next meeting of the Board of Education is May 5th, and we'll see you virtually then. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Just big thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.